Why we should do a DLP? What are the key things which come to mind immediately? One is definitely compliance. Second is there has to be a secure working environment. Third, your IPR and all the critical information protection. Here, this is the big one, because in manufacturing, most of what you do actually is made in your labs, either by your own self or through JVs. Now, if you can't defend the IPR, then you are actually creating a huge problem for the organization, which directly has an impact on the brand. And of course, if it's a JV and there's a huge loss of sensitive data, there can be a huge cost attached to that. Now, how do we evaluate the process? Now, there are multiple brands in the organization, and on the face of it, most of the brands look almost the same. If you go and talk to all the leading brands, their features, everything look more or less the same. So what we did, we first of all shortlisted among the top 2-3 players in this industry. We asked them to do a POC at our end on our actual environment, on our actual live data. And then we also created a defined parameters against which we'll evaluate these DLPs. And these parameters came from our experience of defending the IPR, defending our various, and also knowing that if we have to send certain data knowingly out of the organization, how do we have a control on that kind of data? How do I control the data flow within the organization and outside the organization? And in security, it is very important that we do not take a piecemeal approach, especially in terms of DLP, because DLP to me is like an ERP of security. It is the base on which all other initiatives will be made. So what we did was we made a security roadmap where DLP was the starting point. The next point obviously comes the IRMs and all. So we said we should have a DLP solution which has got a case study, proven case studies of integration with your IRMs. That is how your file behaves once it leaves your own network. We had cross-checked with a lot of clients. We underwent a lot of case studies. We also saw whether the vendor itself had a strong roadmap or not, because DLP is a one-time implementation actually. If the DLP vendor is not strong enough, if the product roadmap is not there, there's a strong possibility of you getting locked to a product which may deliver you something point in time as on date. But maybe today or maybe a year or so down the later, as business needs change and the DLP doesn't mature, then it's a big problem. And of course, the cost. So what was the scope? We had multiple options. Somebody said that you first implement DLP only for your R&D setup. That is the most critical. Somebody says include the material guys also. They also use part of the information. But when we went into when we did a deep dive into this, what we found was that there's a huge interrelation between the way information flows in an organization. Now, if we miss any part of the organization, then that means that particular area is liable to send any information outside the domain without our knowledge. So we said that we will cover up the entire base of Escorts. All desktops, laptops, servers, gateways, email solution on the cloud, and all this was integrated with the Active Directory. What were the key implementation highlights? Now, DLP incidentally has a direct impact on the way user start behaving in an organization. Today, if there's no DLP and you are able to send whatever information you want to send from point A to point B, this can be impacted drastically post a DLP. So it's a huge change management effort. In a huge change management effort, it is very, very important that the project is well understood and bought in by the very, very senior guys in business. So we first gave the presentation to our GMC. GMC consists of all the 4 CEOs, CFOs, material heads, R&D heads, and the managing director. We showed them what impact it will have on our day-to-day working. Then we said to attempt implementing the whole of this in a single shot across the organization may be a bit too much. So we said, let's phase it out. Where is my most critical data lying? It is with purchase and it is with the R&D. So we made a phased-wide rollout plan. Third, who understands the data better? IT doesn't, of course. They are the key users in business, in various verticals, who understand the importance of data. So we created core groups. We took senior people from business and created core groups. And while formulating the core groups, we also were very careful not to create silos, because interrelated data must have interrelated working groups. Then only they will be able to understand how data flow happens. For an R&D department, a design is very, very important. But ultimately, that design has to be manufactured. Is that design goes to the purchase team knowingly sends that design to the vendors. So this flow of information has to be captured across groups. And then of course we had a very strong project governance model, because this is a very laborious kind of a job. It is not a very easy or a very glamorous kind of a job. So people tend to become defocused over a period of time. And the most important point in this whole project, what I saw, was the training of users. Once the heart of this whole system is data classification. How intelligently and how accurately you can classify data. Because the first question we asked to the user was, let us classify our confidential data. The first sheet which came from everybody had all kinds of data as classified. Every piece of data was classified. So data classification requires a lot of training to the end users. It is the core users we trained, it is the end users we trained. What exactly you mean by data classification? Third is, people tend to move away from this project. They believe that the organization is now going to install some sort of a surveillance, and whatever I am doing is getting caught. So by mistake, if I do something silly or stupid, that's the end of me. So you have to handle those changes, those mental fears, those assumptions very, very intelligently. And when you do any kind of security setup, I always believe it's better to involve those people who are the direct stakeholders of that is the internal auditors, so that tomorrow, once the project is through, you should not come with some great idea and say, oh, this was not done. So I say, you also be part of the game. So from the very beginning, we had all the auditors part of the mail-in project. Now, this is the heart. I have seen in some cases, people have implemented DLPs by having a sort of content filtering. They have put certain names, certain domain names of the competition, and then say the DLP is implemented. If you really go by this DLP concept, the data classification is the heart. How intelligently you can do classification of data determines how vastly or how accurately have you implemented the DLP. So we created a huge Excel sheet. It had roughly about 20-25 columns, where every piece of information which a department generates was classified. Classified in the sense whether my data is confidential, it is for internal use, or it is public. Data also has a journey. Financial results before the publication is classified. Post the publication is public. So it was a huge journey which we took, and it took us quite a good amount of time to do this activity. And as I said, the moment we said, let's classify data, the first reaction from the R&D team was, everything which I possess is classified. Even the tractor models which we were making about 25 years earlier, they mentioned it highly classified. So this to and fro training of people had to be done. Now, what does classification actually give to the organization? Any organization or any large organization keeps on generating tons and tons of data. And over a period of time, there is so much of data, then we tend to lose the significance of it. Then we start believing that all of this data is good, all of this data is classified, all of this data is public. Once you deep dive into your own data, you find the real value of that data. What in that data is actually relevant in today's time is classified. What of all that volume of data may not be that much relevant, hence can be used for internal usage. So all that deep diving we did. Now in all of this situation, a lot of challenges were there. People were making, for example, your sales forecast in all kind of different templates. So we brought in standardization, we brought in central templates and took those templates as part of classification. And the other aspect which we saw was that people buy this concept, but nobody was ready to own it because of the inherent fears. What happens if data gets leaked? What happens if classification is wrong? I will be caught, something will go wrong with me, and all that stuff. We have to handle that. So we defined who is the owner of information. We also defined who is the custodian. We defined their roles very, very clearly and made sure that whatever we classify, we are not going to put all classification, all policies in blocking mode on day one. We classified data. Based on that classification, we made policies. And for a period of about a quarter time, 3 months time, we allowed those policies to go in a unblocking mode. And what we saw, it was amazing. People had done classifications like on the word cost. Somebody said cost to me is very, very classified. Somebody said design. Design to me is very, very classified. So when these policies were implemented, we saw that the false positives were running into lakhs. So once again, a second round of iteration started with the vendor, with the users. And these keywords were once again looked in. The classification policies, how they had done that, what the understanding was again looked in. And now we have reached a stage where we are slowly putting this classification into a blocking mode. But this journey from a unblocking mode to a blocking mode is absolutely difficult. It is not that easy a project to do. Like if you install a firewall, if you install so many things IT does, it's all in the hands of IT, and you just send a mail, okay, from tomorrow, say from tomorrow onwards, these policies are enforced. But in this particular project, you have to have a user buy-in, because ultimately it is not a one-point implementation of a DLP. DLP is ever evolving, data is ever evolving. So there has got to be a huge business ownership and understanding of this project. What are the key learnings from this project? We should never implement a DLP as an IT project. Never tell business that IT is implementing something which will bring in security to the organization. This is a disaster, absolute disaster. Nobody will buy this. Business will go 4 steps behind. Let business spearhead the project and do most of the talking, because business understands business better. You should never do this project without having dedicated core team from business, because it is those people only who understand their data and what value the data has got. If IT starts classifying data for somebody else, it is going to fall flat. And very, very importantly, you have to involve all the stakeholders, from the end users right to the senior management at each stage of the project, because there are multiple challenges you will get while you implement this particular project at each stage. So it's very imperative that everybody, the entire organization hierarchy is on a common page. And as I said, change management issues, especially in organizations like Escorts, we have a huge history of 65 years. There's a mindset, a set way of doing things. Managing people, managing the way they behave, managing their attitudes, the work culture, bringing in such a drastic change, it's huge, and it has to be managed very, very carefully. And then set the right expectations with the management, because management generally is very innocent. It says, okay, last time you implemented DLP, this means to say everything is secured. So you have to tell them DLP is not the first or the last thing on security. It is the middle path. Though it's a big one, but it doesn't provide security in its entirety. Security is far beyond far beyond any single implementation of any product, be it DLP or anything else. So this was a brief about, just a brief, but it's a big one actually. Thanks.